And the biggest development that I think has happened here is Ethereum.
I thought that Austrian economics was like the world.
A 15-minute introduction to some of the vital wisdom from the Austrian School of Economics. If you understand how information guides the matter which leads to both the biological and socio-economic orders, then you can understand how the world works. The biological order is created via the well-known mechanism of biological evolution, with genes being like the sentences which store the information necessary to create coordinate life order. Mutations cause new genes and thus new information to arise, which leads to a different life form, which is then naturally selected as it inadvertently competes with others, with the winner reproducing more and thus passing on more copies of the better adapted fitter genes information designed to future generations. The information that coordinates the social order emerges and spreads via economic competition, which itself emerges from freedom and the tradition of private property. Free people are motivated to discover the best information with which to increase the rate at which they transform or reorder the matter they exclusively control, their private property, to create wealth. Most of us transform our bodies in a manner that maximizes the value of the wealth in terms of labor, services, or products we produce and then trade with companies, employers, or the public. From our freedom to use or transform our private property emerges the freedom to trade it with anyone in the entire planet, which inadvertently transforms mankind into a global supercomputer where companies are motivated to innovate and learn copy from each other. Competitors thus inadvertently cooperate to create and spread superior information and subsequent social order throughout the world. For example, perhaps a Honda engineer in Tokyo, Japan invented power door locks, and thanks to the economic competition which emerges from people's freedom to only trade their wealth for what they calculate to be best, BMW, Ford, Toyota and other competitors had to also copy the power door locks idea and thus inadvertently spread superior information and subsequent order throughout the world. It is our freedom as consumers to trade our life and order sustaining wealth for what we calculate to be best, and if we have superior information as producers to go into business, which motivates existing businesses competitors to innovate, compete, copy, learn. Just like in the Olympics we can discover the best athletes in the world due to global competition, so does having the freedom to trade with everyone in the world allows the best ideas to compete and spread globally, thus ensuring the best possible global order. Via advertising, competitors are motivated to spread the potential usefulness and superiority of their products' ideas as well as the defects inferiority of their competitors, thus accelerating the need to compete, copy, spread superior information and subsequent order. As cost-cutting ideas emerge and inevitably spread via competition, leading relative prices to continuously fall, new profitable ideas easily arise and once again spread via competition in an endless cycle of knowledge generation innovation. For example, computers were once very expensive, but once the price of making them came down enough, people easily realized that every home could have them, which gave birth to our computerized world and the internet and all the great things that flow from it. The more wealth is produced, the more wealth must be offered in exchange for labor as companies compete against each other for the labor they need, which helps explain why the economic pie grows for everyone. Morals are ways of acting, they too are knowledge which also emerges and spreads via economic competition to considerable degrees. It is hard-working, tolerant, courteous people, who thanks to competition, inevitably motivate everyone else to be likewise. As Hayek writes, competition is, after all, always a process in which a small number makes it necessary for larger numbers to do what they do not like, be it to work harder, to change habits, or to devote a degree of attention, continuous application, or regularity to their work which without competition would not be needed. As millions of Italians, Britons, Germans, Jews and others from all over the world came to America, it was ultimately the competition which grows from private property and thus individual liberty which stripped these people of their otherwise nationalistic, ethnocentric, tribalistic identities and evolved what came to be seen as the classic American character of wanting to be seen as a reputable and honest businessman or professional, who treats everyone with respect and wears a business suit as opposed to older ethnocentric attires. The role of governments and thus coercion should be minimized because governmental or public sector bureaucracies, being coercive monopolies which get their life or order sustaining wealth through taxes and compulsion, are immune to the competitive information spreading incentives which motivate private sector entities to keep up with the competition in terms of information and hustle. Government plans can't work if people are free to not go along with or fund them, so they inevitably require compulsion. The former Soviet Union had plenty of highly educated scientists and experts whose plans required the coercion of millions, as still happens in Cuba, but they were thoroughly crushed by free Americans and their competitive knowledge discovery. The classic nighttime image below helps explain the difference between competitive private free orders and monopolistic government coerced orders. Keep your eye on how information arises and spreads via competition and continuously restructures the social order. In the free private competitive sector, information constantly moves and evolves as it is tested, refined, preferred by the comparisons to other information by billions of minds or customers, thus ensuring superior information spreads and is ideally adapted to each specific time and place. This mechanism is destroyed by government regulations which are top-down, coercive, competitionless monopoly information which is not subject to continuous improvement or replacement via competition, so they paralyze entire industries, slowing down competitive knowledge discovery, driving up costs, more lawyers, regulators, bureaucrats, and potentially making criminals out of people who harm nobody but just prefer to do things differently. Hayek reminds us. The argument for liberty is not an argument against organization, which is one of the most powerful tools human reason can employ, but an argument against all exclusive, privileged, monopolistic organization, against the use of coercion to prevent others from doing better. Compare the increasingly regulated, paralyzed healthcare sector, which has grown from consuming less than 5% of the economic pie in 1960 to over 20% today, culminating in the spectacular COVID mania tyranny, to the free competitive IT sector where even the poorest of Americans can afford rapidly improving amazing cell phones and technology. In the graph below one can see how the more regulated and thus competition immune a sector is, hospital services, the more expensive it becomes. It is important to envision the socio-economic order as it really exists, as if looked at from high above. Envision people coming together and apart as companies emerge and dissolve in ever-changing conditions. Superior information arising, rippling, restructuring the social order thanks to economic competition. Each person and company using profit and loss calculation to ensure that it produces more than it consumes, thus being profitable, and growing the global socio-economic order organism. As companies get more productive, they lure people to trade with or join them by offering more money, wealth for their labor, eventually causing the least productive companies to sort of dissolve as their factors of production like labor, buildings, etc. are bid away to be parts of the more productive and thus better informed plans. A sort of swarm intelligence emerges as the all-pervasive public constantly uses its freedom to trade its wealth for what it calculates to be best to nourish the growth and spread of superior companies' information, inadvertently expanding the worldwide division of labor and information as entire neighborhoods and cities morph themselves in specialized ways as complementary pieces of information orders, segregate themselves in distinct geographical locations like the software industry in Silicon Valley, California, and manufacturing in Guangdong, southern China. As Mises reminds us, the division of labor is a fundamental principle of all forms of life. Thus freedom and emerging competitive knowledge discovery, as opposed to leading to chaos, is what 1. Enables and motivates the discovery and spread of superior information and subsequent social order, 2. Civilizes us, 3. Protects us from being coerced into doing something we don't want and thus allows us to live our lives as we wish, 4. And is vital for discovering the truth. Freedom is the ultimate algorithm. For centuries the Catholic Church's traditions held immense coercive monopoly competitionless power which prevented or retarded individual freedom, and emerging competitive knowledge discovery. In the early 1500s, among other religious reinterpretations, Martin Luther preached that indulgences, payments to the Catholic Church to help one go to heaven, were unnecessary, that a person could go to heaven by believing in Christ without the Catholic Church's approval, and that the Bible itself, not the Church's edicts interpretations, was what mattered. This helped reduce the coercive monopoly power of the Catholic Church and spark a pro-freedom, and thus emergent competitive knowledge discovery transformation. Instead of people thinking and producing for the never-changing priesthood, people now gained the freedom to think and produce for each other, leading to competitive knowledge discovery and skyrocketing rates of innovation production prosperity in Europe, Christendom. Now, very important. Did Martin Luther reason that his religious reinterpretations would accelerate competitive knowledge discovery leading to global capitalism, and Homo sapiens' recent skyrocketing prosperity? Of course not. Just like solitary cells millions of years ago inadvertently via an evolutionary process created the respiratory, circulatory, nervous etc. systems that led to multicellular organisms without designing them, so is language, the free market and capitalism, to borrow the insightful phrase from Adam Ferguson, indeed the result of human action, but not the execution of any human design, or as Karl Menger writes, they, too, present themselves to us rather as natural products, in a certain sense, as unintended results of historical development. Having spent most of our evolutionary history as tribal smarter apes, we have simply not evolved to intuitively understand the recently emerged evolutionary forces and market mechanisms like money, competitive knowledge discovery, finance, banking, etc. that create the social order, the vital need for freedom and privatization, and the immense harm that too much government can do. Tribal warfare, political infighting, coercing each other, rape, and the law of the jungle, are things we have been doing for millions of years and are somewhat intuitive. Commercial society and understanding the aforementioned economic concepts which have been around for less than a few thousand is not. Hayek summarizes. Man's instincts were not made for the kinds of surroundings, and for the numbers, in which he now lives. They were adapted to life in the small roving bands or troops in which the human race and its immediate ancestors evolved during the few million years while the biological constitution of Homo sapiens was being formed. The dodo bird quickly went extinct because it had not evolved to recognize humans as potential dangers. We similarly just line up for central planning and government-coordinated self-destruction over and over. Notice how the biggest companies or private sector orders in the world like Amazon, Apple, Walmart, Google, and Microsoft, which hire and efficiently coordinate the actions of millions of fellow Homo sapiens across the world regardless of age, sex, religion or race, do not force anyone to buy their products or coerce anyone in any way and have no army or tribalistic and patriotic flag salutations. They spend all of their time peacefully innovating and copying each other's innovations, thus inadvertently spreading superior information and subsequent social order. Yet the human dodos hate the free private sector and love their coercive central planners, great leaders, and coercive monopolistic governmental structures which make it more difficult to overcome inferior ideas and also reinforces some tribal identity, Jews, Russians, Chinese, Americans, Cubans, etc., from which inevitably an us versus them mentality emerges. By the late 1800s, the bewildering complexity of modern cities coupled with, per above, man not having the slightest clue how the competitive knowledge discovery that creates civilization emerges from private property and thus personal liberty, since this amazing mechanism had been designed, not by clever men, but by an evolutionary process we didn't even really understand at the time. Homo sapiens understandably fell for all the usual anti-capitalist, pro-socialist, nationalist, central planning tribal fallacies which still dominate popular thinking to this day. The environment was ripe for the emergence of a new religion, mythology, priesthood, socialism, communism, statism, scientism. Eventually a slightly smarter ape would describe these fallacies, myths, in a manner that was bound to go viral, and that is what happened with Karl Marx and his bite-sized Communist Manifesto. The theory of the communists may be summed up in the single sentence: abolition of private property, abolition of the family. The apes via Lenin's Bolshevik Revolution in Russia, 1918, and other great leaders throughout the world, Mao China, Castro Cuba, Pol Pot Cambodia, Roosevelt USA, created massive central planning coercive bureaucracies that paralyzed or destroyed competitive knowledge discovery and thus their own socio-economic order that was sustained by it. It is vitally important that we see our socio-economic chaos not as conspiracies by nefarious elites, nor bad politicians, or stupidity, but as an almost inevitable spread of viral self-reinforcing echo chambers of economic fallacies spread by clueless well-meaning scholars and disastrous incentive structures that inadvertently cause the apes to self-destroy via government coercive central planning, and tribalistic wars. As F.A. Hayek tells us, it is necessary to realize that the sources of many of the most harmful agents in this world are often not evil men but high-minded idealists, and that in particular the foundations of totalitarian barbarism have been laid by honorable and well-meaning scholars who never recognized the offspring they produced. Hayek again. Most people are still unwilling to face the most alarming lesson of modern history, that the greatest crimes of our time have been committed by governments that had the enthusiastic support of millions of people who were guided by moral impulses. It is simply not true that Hitler or Mussolini, Lenin or Stalin, appealed only to the worst instincts of their people, They also appealed to some of the feelings which also dominate contemporary democracies. Since economic ignorance is the root of our socio-economic problems per Mises, it should be part of our civic duty to help fellow citizens overcome such ignorance. Mises writes, "All reasonable men are called upon to familiarize themselves with the teachings of economics. This is, in our age, the primary civic duty.